Before Amara, tightly bound to an ancient willow tree in the heart of the Louisiana swamp forest, stood a creature that left her frozen in shock. A pregnant mermaid, her golden scales shimmering like shattered sunlight, her desperate eyes reaching out toward Amara, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Please save me. If you don't, both I and my child will die." Amara, a poor single mother living in seclusion on the edge of the swamp with her 2 children, had never believed in legends. But in that moment, every old tale from her grandmother, every warning from the villagers about the water spirits, came rushing back to life. She stood at a crossroads, flee, as her instincts urged, or risk everything to untie the ropes binding a mythical creature, a choice that could either save or curse her family forever. And in that very moment, Amara's fate began to shift. All right, my amazing audience, if this story had you holding your breath from the very first seconds, don't hesitate. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. Every time I read your messages from all corners of the world, it warms my heart and fuels my inspiration to keep telling fantastical stories like this one. Let's keep the flame of legend burning bright together. Amid the thick, cold fog that cloaked the ancient trees, their branches drooping over the still waters of the Louisiana swamp, stood a dilapidated wooden shack nestled among the reeds and gnarled tree roots. That was where Amara lived, a dark-skinned woman with thick, curly hair, a gaunt face, but eyes that always shone with a spark of resilience. She had nothing but her calloused hands and a heart that knew how to endure. Each day for Amara began before the first crow of the rooster. When the night had not yet lifted, when the frogs still croaked quietly by the water's edge and fireflies flickered among the windless palm fronds, she was already awake, tying a cloth around her waist, placing an old iron pot on her head, and stepping out of the house. She treaded lightly along the narrow path leading into the forest, where a sweet stream wound its way through giant tree roots and dense thickets. That stream was the lifeline she had known her entire life. Amara bent down to collect water as she did every day, steadily, carefully, as if each drop were the lifeblood of this land. She never complained. Returning home, she kindled a fire with dry branches, tossed into the pot a few perch she had caught by hand, added some wild greens growing behind the house, and seasoned it with the fiery, pungent spices from the small garden out back. That steaming, spicy, fragrant gumbo was all she had to feed her 2 children through the day. The villagers often said that if you wanted to know how strong a woman could be, you only needed to look into Amara's eyes as she carried water home through a storm. 6 years ago, her husband, a young sailor who once dreamed of taking her to the horizon beyond the bay, had gone out to sea during a gale and never returned. No one found his body, only a few torn nets that washed ashore and the wedding ring she had worn ever since, still resting on her finger. From that day on, she became both father and mother. The swamp was never an easy place to live, especially for a single woman. But Amara never uttered a word of complaint. She caught fish with her hands, wove baskets to trade for corn, grew onions in rusty tin cans, and taught her children to honor their ancestors each time the sun set. She taught Malik, her older son, how to read the wind, how to listen to the owl's call to predict rain. Zaria, her younger daughter, was taught how to tell healing plants from poisonous ones and how to tie a cloth so the wind wouldn't snatch it away on gusty days. The scattered community sometimes came to her for help, treating snake bites, performing rituals for the dead, or simply hearing a prayer. Amara never turned anyone away. She believed her ancestors were watching over her, through the solitary calls of nightbirds on dry branches, through the flickering fireflies when she stepped onto the porch in the quiet of the night. One could be poor in money, poor in possessions, but never poor in spirit. That was the lesson Amara silently taught her children every day, not with words, but through the sweat that fell to the ground and the eyes that always looked up when facing hardship. And on a morning that seemed as ordinary as any other, that life quietly veered onto a path no one could have foreseen. That morning began like any other, with fog as thick as smoke and the swamp's water biting cold like needles. But something strange unsettled Amara. The air seemed quieter than usual. No owl's call, no flapping wings of wild ducks, only a thin, dense layer of mist, as if concealing something beneath the ancient trees. Amara decided not to take her usual path. She chose a narrow trail through the wild eastern forest, a place few ventured because of the dense trees, soft ground and frequent snakes. But she knew this route would cut her journey in half, allowing her to return before her 2 children woke. Her hand gripped the rim of the iron pot balanced on her head, her feet stepping lightly over decaying leaves and gnarled roots. As she neared an ancient willow, its trunk leaning toward the lake as if whispering something to the water, Amara froze. A faint sound, like wind brushing through leaves, yet sharp enough to send a chill down her spine. It wasn't the sound of a forest creature, nor a falling branch. It was a moan, faint, faltering, as if someone was struggling to utter their final words from a distant realm. She set the water pot down, crouched slightly, and listened in silence. The sound came again, clearer this time, as if whispered right by her ear. "Save me." Amara's heart pounded, part fear, part curiosity. Cautiously she stepped toward the back of the willow, where thick ferns obscured her view, and as she parted the leaves, her breath caught in her throat. There, wrapped around the tree, was a creature of breathtaking beauty. She was unlike anything Amara had ever seen. Her skin shimmered with a pearlescent glow, reflecting the dim light like the surface of a lake under a new moon. Her long wet hair cascaded like soft strands of seaweed. Her large eyes, glowing with a mystical golden hue, were filled with both panic and pleading. But what turned Amara to stone was the tail. A long tail, covered in shimmering golden scales, glinting like the sun shattered and scattered across her body. And more than that, she was pregnant. The rounded belly of a woman about to give birth left Amara reeling. Fear surged through her chest like a gust of cold wind. The village legends of water spirits, mermaids who cursed those who dared approach, now stood vivid before her, no longer mere rumours or fireside tales. But she didn't look like a demon. On the contrary, her face was filled with desperation, her lips pale, her body shivering from the cold. Rough forest vines bound her arms and legs tightly, dark streaks of blood seeping onto the ground. In that moment, Amara was no longer just a poor woman living on the edge of the swamp. She was a witness to something miraculous, or perhaps a calamity hidden deep within the forest. And when the mermaid's eyes quietly met Amara's, something silent, unspoken, forged a connection between 2 beings who seemed worlds apart, and fate began to speak. Amara stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest, as if it might shatter her ribs. Before her, the strange creature lay, frail and silent like an unfinished curse. The faint light filtering through the swamp's canopy fell upon the mermaid's body, making the golden scales on her tail gleam like flickering fire in the mist. But it wasn't her beauty that stunned Amara. It was the rounded belly, the sign of life forming within a tormented body. A gentle forest breeze brushed against her skin, carrying the musty scent of decaying leaves and the metallic tang of blood. Thorny vines tightly bound the mermaid's hands, shoulders and tail, leaving swollen purple bruises and trickles of blood. Her body trembled with each shiver, her eyes silent with a plea she couldn't voice. Amara wanted to step back. A part of her screamed to leave, to get away as fast as possible. Having lived in the swamp for years, she had heard enough stories about creatures lurking beneath the water's surface. Lost spirits, mermaids who seduced men only to drag them to the cold riverbed. From childhood she had been taught, never touch what doesn't belong to the human world. But there was no curse in those eyes, no threat, no deceit, only exhaustion, panic and a primal fear, the same look any mother would have, clinging to the last shred of hope for her unborn child. And then another gust of wind brought sounds that turned Amara to stone. Footsteps. And laughter. Low. Harsh. Mingled with the soft lapping of water against the shore. A voice echoed from a distance, broken by the dense trees. It wasn't the sound of herb gatherers or fishermen, it was the voice of heartless men, carrying only nooses and blades in their hands. Amara turned her head, her eyes quickly scanning the thick forest. Her breathing grew rapid. They were coming. There was no choice left. Her hand reached out, trembling but resolute. The thorny vines, tough as iron hooks, tore into her palms. Blood began to seep, staining her skin like red threads connecting two strangers' fates. The knots were tight, each one laced with the cruelty of whoever had bound them. But Amara didn't stop. Her fingers were scratched, her nails broken, yet she persisted, working through each knot. The pain of torn flesh no longer deterred her. Something had shifted within Amara. A spark had ignited deep inside, like a flame flaring up in the midst of cold water. The mermaid said nothing, but in those glistening glass-like eyes, her gaze. It spoke her gratitude, and Amara felt it, though not a single word was uttered. The footsteps grew closer, twigs snapped underfoot. The air grew heavy as if the entire swamp was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. But the vines still held, and Amara still didn't stop. The moment the final knot loosened from the swollen wrists, Amara felt as if the entire forest exhaled a pent-up breath. The vines fell to the ground, heavy as if a sin had just been released from the captive's body. The mermaid curled in on herself, her freed hands limp, too exhausted to lift her own body from the cold, damp earth. And then, a scream pierced the air. From the water's edge, a man's voice, hoarse with rage, tore through the mist. "She's escaped! Someone's helping her!" Amara had no time for fear. Her body reacted before her mind could. Her bloodied hand reached out again, wrapping around the mermaid's back, pulling her up. The long, slick tail, like seawater, slid over Amara's shoulder, heavy as if carrying an entire ocean. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her feet sank into the soft earth, but she didn't step back. Carrying the creature on her back, Amara stumbled through the ferns growing close to the ground. Wet leaves brushed her face, gnarled roots tore at her cloth, but she didn't stop. The mermaid's faint breath grazed the back of her neck, fragile as a final exhale. The cold tail brushed against her waist, leaving a slick trail like night dew on her skin. But Amara kept moving, each step trembling and reckless, deeper into the heart of the forest. The sound of the hunter's footsteps echoed close behind. She heard the distinct click of a gun being cocked, the crunch of branches under heavy boots. Amara's heart pounded like a war drum, and her legs began to betray her, trembling with each step. They veered toward a shallow creek, and suddenly, Amara froze. Ahead, a massive, dark-scaled figure blocked the path. It was a fully grown swamp alligator, its body long and thick like a dark log, its half-closed eyes glinting orange like ghostly embers. Its wide snout, lined with jagged teeth, parted slowly as if weighing whether to make them its breakfast. Amara stood rigid. There was no way around, no time to turn back. They were trapped. But then the mermaid, slumped on her back, lifted her head slightly, her lips moving. It wasn't human speech, nor a cry. It was a series of strange, deep and smooth sounds, like water dripping onto stone. Soft, ancient, almost sacred. The alligator raised its head, its ears attuned. Amara could sense an invisible connection between the two creatures. Something that needed no explanation. Then, ever so slowly, the alligator turned, silently sinking into the mud, leaving behind only rippling water and a few bubbles spreading across the surface. The path was clear. Amara didn't believe in miracles, but in that moment, she didn't need to. The life resting on her back had spoken for itself. Without looking back, Amara ran on, her feet treading through the mud left by the alligator. The mermaid slumped against her shoulder, her frail fingers clutching the edge of Amara's shirt as if clinging to her last thread of life. If this story leaves you speechless or smiling in silence, let us know where you're listening from. The world is vast, but every share, every subscription, makes it feel closer. And who knows, the next story might just begin right where you stand. The shack of Amara nestled under the shadow of an old pecan tree, silent as if it were part of the swamp forest's very flesh. The weathered wooden beams creaked as the door was pushed open in the misty dawn. The wind outside swept through the tattered thatched roof, carrying the scent of fresh mud and thick dampness. Amara stepped inside, sweat still clinging to her neck, her back burdened with the heavy weight of a creature not of this world. She laid the mermaid on the straw bed in the corner of the shack, the spot reserved for Malik whenever he fell ill. The creature's body was cold and soft, like a stream just run dry, her eyes still half open in exhaustion. The golden scales on her tail were now streaked with mud and thorns, but under the faint light seeping through the wall's cracks, they still shimmered with a beauty beyond naming. The soft patter of bare feet sounded behind her. Malik and Zaria, Amara's two children, stood silently in the doorway. Their eyes were wide, glinting with a mix of awe and confusion. Zaria stepped forward, gently tugging at her mother's shirt, and whispered, as if afraid her words might shatter something sacred. "Mum, she has light." Amara didn't answer. She only placed a finger gently on her lips, her eyes signalling, "Be quiet." The three of them stood there as if before a mysterious ritual they didn't fully understand. Sana, that was the name the creature whispered as Amara pressed warm water to her hands after the chaos had settled. Her voice was thin as smoke, each word like a tiny ember on the verge of fading. In the quiet night, with Zaria asleep, Malik resting his head on his mother's lap, and Amara sitting by the fire, Sana spoke, a story unlike anything they had ever heard. She was not human. But neither was she a monster. She belonged to the Posema, a tribe of water spirits who had guarded this swamp since before humans drew maps. They didn't live on the surface but merged with the water, the tree roots, the wind, and the deepest dreams of humankind. For centuries, they had kept the swamp from being overtaken, maintaining balance between nature and the spirit world. But in recent years, the human world had changed. Respect turned to curiosity, curiosity to pursuit. Men in neat clothing carrying cameras and long rifles had invaded the swamp with promises to uncover the uncharted. They didn't come to learn but to possess. One of them, a wealthy white man, infamous for his collection of mythical creatures, had offered a fortune for anyone who could find a real mermaid. The hunters scoured the waters, capturing anything unusual, and Sanaa was their most prized catch. Amara listened in silence. The small fire danced in her eyes, reflecting a world being violated, a sacred lineage being sold like a curiosity in a human market. A quiet anger smouldered within her, not at Sanaa, but at how easily humans trampled the sacred just to satisfy their curiosity. Sanaa didn't beg to stay. She didn't speak of hiding forever, but her eyes, once again, pleaded for one thing: time. A little time to recover, to bring the child in her womb into the world, and return to where she belonged. And Amara, with a mother's instinct, understood that more than anyone. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thatched roof, Amara's wooden shack remained cloaked in fragile silence. The faint light slipped through the cracks in the walls, casting a silvery glow on Sanaa's face. The mermaid lay there, still as a spirit trapped in mortal flesh, the wounds on her arms soothed by the warm compresses Amara had applied through the night, but her eyes, half closed, had yet to find true rest. The air in the house was thick with an indescribable scent, salty, cool. Mingled with the smell of damp earth was a strange aroma, the scent of ancient waves, of moss and sea breeze, as if carrying the memory of the ocean in every breath. Outside, the old rooster crowed for the third time when a knock came at the door, not rushed, but impossible to ignore. The steady tap-tap echoed like the pulse of suspicion, not hurried, but deliberate. Amara froze mid-task, washing a mud-stained cloth. Her hands stilled in the water, her heart tightening into a solid knot. She had lived long enough to recognize that knock, the sound of someone who came not out of care but out of a need to know. Miss Edna. Her silhouette loomed beyond the door's crack, small but imposing. She didn't need words. Her gaze alone was enough to probe every shadow. Her eyes swept from the yard to the doorstep, lingering on a patch of flattened grass, a faint trace of something large that had passed through. Amara stepped forward, opening the door only a sliver. Miss Edna's voice rang out, dry as a broom scraping parched earth. No pleasantries, no introductions, just a shard of suspicion wrapped in a few short words, heavy with implication. Amara didn't answer. She tilted her head, offering a smile as thin as a falling leaf, letting the question hang in the wind. But inside she felt it clearly. The secret she was sheltering was no longer safe. After Miss Edna left, the shack seemed to shrink. The already small space now felt like it was choking Amara's breath. Steam rose from the pot of porridge, carrying the faint briny scent of the sea from Sanaa's skin. There was no way to mask that smell, no way to hide the difference between human and water spirit dwelling under this roof. That night, Malik muttered in his sleep, disjointed words that made no sense but tightened Amara's heart with every syllable. In his dreams, he spoke of light, of water, of a woman who didn't walk but glided like moonlight on a lake. Amara sat beside him, her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, her own weighed down with dread. She knew children had sharper senses than adults. They could feel what grown-ups tried to deny. And Malik, with eyes that had once watched his father sail away never to return, had surely sensed something in the house that didn't belong to this world. Amara turned to look at Sana, who had drifted into a fitful sleep, her breath as delicate as a thread of mist. The rounded belly rose and fell quietly beneath the tattered blanket, a gentle yet fierce reminder time was running out. Outside, the sun climbed higher, but inside, something sacred was slipping through her fingers, and somewhere in the village, eyes were already following the direction of the wind. The sky hadn't fully darkened, but black clouds had already shrouded it like a vast burial cloth. The wind turned cold, whistling through the tattered thatched roof of Amara's shack, howling in gusts like stifled sobs. The storm came unannounced, not quite a downpour, but the way the sky held its breath signalled something was drawing near. Word of the hunter's return spread through the village like wildfire through dry grass. They moved in groups, knocking on doors, their eyes cold, hands always resting on the butts of their guns. This time, there were no gentle inquiries. They weren't searching for an object. They were hunting for trembling gazes, evasive breaths, the slightest falter in speech. They could smell fear. And Amara knew fear was something you couldn't hide. She didn't wait for their knock. In the dim twilight, as thunder rumbled like funeral drums in the distance, Amara carefully wrapped Sanaa in her husband's old brocade blanket, the only keepsake left from the man who never returned from the sea. That blanket had once held Amara through nights of grief, cradling both her past and her sorrow. Today, it enveloped another being of the sea, also hunted, also carrying a wordless loneliness. Sanaa was light as water, but the weight of her slick tail and pregnant belly made Amara's steps laborious. The ground beneath had turned to mud, slippery and biting cold. Each step was a gash on her soles, a ache in her back, a sob choked back in her throat. But Amara didn't stop. Not once did she look back. Rain began to fall, silent as if the sky itself didn't want to disturb the sacred stillness. The rain mingled with sweat, with unshed tears, soaking her body as she carried the life of two worlds. Finally, they reached the lake's edge. The water was dark as obsidian, eerily still. No frogs croaked, no night birds called. Only Amara's breath, hoarse and broken, filled the air. She gently set Sanaa down, her hands trembling as she unwrapped the blanket. Sanaa opened her eyes, weak but shining with a strange clarity. No fear, no more despair. Only peace, the kind she had sought in her restless sleep the night before. Sanaa reached out, her hand faintly brushing Amara's neck in a gesture of gratitude. No words were needed, but her voice came anyway, thin as mist but piercing to the heart. You saved me, and an entire lineage of spirits. We will never forget. In that moment, a soft light began to spread from Sanaa's body, not blinding, but gentle, like a full moon melting into the water. The golden scales on her tail glimmered like stars fallen to earth, each pulse of light blending with the rain, the wind, and the lake. Sanaa slipped into the water, silently, without a sound. The surface parted to receive her, then closed again, as if nothing had happened. Amara stood there for a long time, her feet sunk in mud, her eyes fixed on the faintly rippling water. Above, the clouds parted, revealing a trembling sliver of moon. But within her, something had been set right. Not loss, not pain, but a silent promise between mothers. Yet as Amara turned back, she didn't yet know. The strangest gift was quietly waiting at her doorstep. 7 days had passed since that rainy night, the night Amara returned Sanaa to the water, where the mermaid vanished like a star sinking into the lake. For a week, no one in the village knew what had transpired. The hunters left after days of fruitless searching, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. And Amara, she went on with her daily tasks, as if nothing had changed, though within her, each heartbeat carried a different rhythm. At dawn on the 7th day, when the fog still hung thick like a damp blanket over the earth, Amara jolted awake to a strange, cold breeze slipping through the door's cracks. No knock, no sound, just a vague sensation, as if someone had crossed the threshold without leaving footprints. She quickly wrapped an old cloth around herself and opened the door with hands still bearing faint scars from days before. And there, on the earthen step, under the slanting light of a waning moon, was a strange wooden chest, not large, but heavy, very heavy. The chest was intricately carved, its swirling patterns resembling the depths of the ocean. On its lid was the image of a radiant golden fish scale, etched beside a six-pointed starfish. So delicate it seemed to glow, there was no lock, no seal, just an anonymous object sitting silently, as if it had been waiting there for ages. Amara didn't rush to open it. She lifted it with both hands, brought it inside, and only when the sun began to peek through the trees did she gently lift the lid. Inside was light, not blinding, but a gentle light, golden warm, rich like a sunset flowing within the earth. There were strange gold coins she had never seen, wooden charms inscribed with ancient script, and 3 emerald green gems, the size of plums, glowing from within as if they were breathing. Amara didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She simply placed a hand on her chest where her heart beat calmly and let out a long breath. She understood. No thanks were needed, no promises required. This was a response, not just for what she had done, but for the faith she had held through the darkest nights. Months later, whispers began to spread about Amara. The woman who once sold woven baskets by the river had now bought a large plot of land near the village. On that land, a small school was built, with a thatched roof and earthen floor, but always filled with the laughter of children. Malik and Zaria were educated, nurtured not just with good food and warm clothes, but with lessons of kindness, courage, and seeing the sacred in the smallest things. Amara never boasted. She still lived simply, still carried water, still swept the yard, still cooked porridge every morning as before. But each afternoon when the sun fell on the lake like honey, she would sit quietly on the doorstep, her eyes gazing toward the water, a faint smile on her lips. She never shared the story. Not with the village, not with outsiders, not even with her children. For some things endure longest when left unspoken, and when someone, usually a newcomer to the village, hesitantly asked, "Sister Amara, how did you become so prosperous?" She would only smile, gently turning the weathered scale bracelet on her left wrist, and say, "Sometimes, when you save someone, it's you who gets saved." But then, on another night, when the full moon once again shone down on the water, something strange would knock at that small shack's door once more. And so Amara's story closed in silence, not the silence of an ending, but the stillness before a new beginning. For life always finds a way to reward those who bravely choose kindness, even when that kindness means placing their own lives in the hands of fate. In the darkness of poverty, loneliness, and loss, Amara chose light. A light born of unconditional kindness, of compassion amidst the inexplicable, of seeing humanity in the strangest of beings. Her story is not just a legend. It is a reminder that sometimes we don't need to understand everything to do what is right. And perhaps it is in our most powerless moments, when nothing remains but a truthful heart, that true miracles happen. But the light from the chest was only the first sign. The next full moon is drawing near, and the ripples on the lake's surface are stirring once more. Amara thought the story had ended, but Zaria's eyes, the little girl who dreams of the ocean every night, are telling a different tale. So, what awaits them beyond the door of part 2? We'll find out soon enough. If this story touched your heart, drop a like, share this video with someone who needs a spark of hope, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe in miracles? Would you be willing to save a soul without knowing the consequences? Tell me your story. And if you're ready to continue the journey with Amara, let me know you're ready for part 2, because the sacred has never truly left this earth. If you have ever loved someone so deeply that you were willing to sacrifice your own peace just to protect them, then you will understand Amara. A year has passed since the night she held the blood-soaked mermaid in her arms, fleeing through the marshy forest with a heart that felt like it might shatter. Now she still lives by the water's edge, being a mother, a teacher, a keeper of the flame for the forgotten children. But in her heart there is still something unsettled, a smouldering unease, like a wound that has not yet healed. Every moonlit night, the lake sings. The wind carries the scent of the sea seeping into Zaria's dreams. And then, one cold morning, a faint green light from the well behind the house begins to tell a story. One that should have ended, but the past, if it has not been forgiven, will always find a way to return. Zaria is no longer the little girl who used to run and leap around the yard. Once a radiant child whose clear, ringing laughter echoed through the marsh, Amara's daughter now carries the quiet stillness of a tree's shadow at dusk. The villagers have begun to whisper, "There's something strange about that girl," they say, watching Zaria stand for hours by the lake's edge, her bare feet leaving imprints in the damp mud, her hands lightly tracing strange, spiraling patterns in the sand, as if rewriting the memories of some distant dream. Amara watches her daughter with an uneasy heart. Every morning, she rises before the sun, cooking a pot of corn porridge for the children in her class, and quietly glances toward the well behind the house. That well, once just a deep hole lined with stones, used for fetching water for washing and cooking, has changed in recent months. Under the moonlight, its surface now reflects a faint greenish glow. Not the moon's light, not moss, but something alive. It's not just the light. The winds in the village have shifted too. The night breezes carry a faint scent of sea salt, slipping through the leaf walls, threading under the thatched roofs, as if the ocean itself is breathing in their ears. Strangely, Zaria is unafraid. The girl seems to be waiting for something, or someone, to return. One night, Amara caught Zaria murmuring in her sleep. The girl's voice was soft, like waves lapping at the shore, though the words were unclear. One name kept repeating in her breath. "Sana! Sana!" Amara clutched the tattered blanket around herself, her calloused hands hardened by years of labour beginning to tremble. Sana, a name etched into her heart from a night of fleeing through the mud, cradling a wondrous creature with a radiant golden tail, both beautiful and painful. She had thought that night was long gone, sunk into slumber with the spirits of the lake. But clearly, what she had tried to bury still lived. Each time Amara sees Zaria drawing in the dirt, she doesn't just see her daughter. She sees a door slowly creaking open between two worlds. And what frightens her is not that Sana might return, but that Zaria might leave. The full moon is approaching, and the well is glowing brighter than usual. In Amara's heart, something is stirring, like the marsh preparing to shift when a great rain is near. Could it be that something, or someone, is calling from the other side of the water? All right, my wonderful friends. If you're already getting chills from the start of this story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and comment to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm always excited to connect with you all from every corner of the world. The night wind suddenly rose from the lake, sweeping through the thatched roof like a whispered warning. The sky was pitch black, and the air seemed to thicken, sending a shiver through Amara. Inside the house, Zarya abruptly writhed in her sleep, her body burning as if consumed by fire. Amara rushed to her side, her mother's hand pressing against her daughter's forehead, feeling a heat fiercer than the kitchen flames. The girl's breaths came in gasps, sweat pouring like rain, her lips trembling faintly in her delirium. A name slipped out, fragile as a breeze yet sharp as a blade cutting deep into Amara's memories. Sana. Amara froze. It had been a year since the night she saved the golden-scaled mermaid from the hunter's grasp. A year since the moment light enveloped her body and carried her back to the depths of the dark lake. Amara had thought it all lay dormant beneath the water, but Zarya, her daughter of mortal blood, was dreaming that name. It couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be just a fever. She sat by the bed, clutching Zarya's small, sweat-soaked hand. The dim oil lamp cast a faint glow on the girl's face, contorted in pain. The murmurs continued, fragmented words, disjointed images. Light, the marsh, a song, golden eyes. Amara felt as though she were hearing her own old dreams again, but this time the fear wasn't about Sana. It was about what Sana might want or need from her daughter. She couldn't know. There was only one thing she could do: pray. "Don't take her," Amara whispered, her eyes fixed on the flickering flame. "If any spirit lingers there, please spare my daughter." That night dragged on like a lifetime. Each time the wind howled through the door's cracks, Amara startled. She feared the next call wouldn't come only from her daughter's lips, but from beyond the lake. And when dawn broke, Zarya opened her eyes, her gaze distant, brimming with tears, as if she had swum through a long dream and wasn't sure if she had fully returned. When the first rays of the morning sun peeked over the treetops, casting gentle golden light onto the thatched roof of Amara's house, she sensed something unusual. It wasn't the sound of the wind or the familiar chirping of birds, but a tiny, shimmering light on the windowsill. Small scales, glistening like the first dewdrops, each one resembling the wings of a summer cicada, but bearing the golden hue of a sunset over the sea. Amara froze. Her eyes widened, her heart tightened as if a fragment of memory had fallen from a dream. Those scales. She had seen them before, on that fateful night when the mermaid lay motionless in her arms amidst the marshy forest, her radiant golden tail wrapped around Amara's waist like both a curse and a blessing. It could only be Sana, but she did not appear. No call, no blinding light, nothing but the silent trace left behind, like a whisper echoing from the depths of a lake, from a place where light never reaches. And that was exactly what made Amara even more anxious. Zarya was still sleeping, but since the fever, the girl seemed no longer herself, silent, distant, her eyes always dreamy, as if gazing through the walls of this world to see somewhere else. A forgotten world, a memory that never existed. And the most frightening thing, she had begun to feel fire in the water. Amara noticed. Every time Zarya washed her hands at the well, she flinched, then stared at her hands as if the harmless liquid had left an invisible burn. At times she tried to hide it, but Amara saw her daughter's hands tremble faintly, not from cold, but from some energy surging into her body, awakening something dormant in her flesh and blood. On the first full moon after the fever, Zaria jolted awake from her sleep. No cry, no dream, just her small feet stepping straight out of bed, moving through the door as if guided by an invisible hand. Amara wasn't asleep. She quietly followed, her heart pounding like a ceremonial drum. Under the moonlight, Zaria walked toward the lake. The wind rose, making her hair flutter like blades of reed in the field. Amara kept her distance, daring only to watch. The girl stopped at the water's edge, her feet muddy. She knelt down, her hand lightly touching the surface of the lake, and in that moment the water glowed. Not blinding, not fierce, but gentle, like a caress from the depths. The light spread from the point where her hand touched, as if Zaria had awakened something within the dark, dense water. Amara stepped closer, tears welling in her eyes. She realized that other world had never truly closed, and her daughter somehow was being invited to step across its threshold. The rain began to fall in the late afternoon, each droplet weaving a thin curtain over the entire village. The wind picked up, not fierce but persistent, carrying a chilly dampness that seeped through every crevice of the leaf-woven walls. Amara sat by the hearth, her hands deftly tending to the dry firewood. The fire crackled in the humid air, casting a warm orange glow on her burst sun-weathered cheeks. Outside, the sky was like a deep black cloth, the rain falling ceaselessly, stirring in Amara memories of days gone by, days when everything was still whole. A distant rumble of thunder echoed, and then, suddenly, the door of the house swung open, not by the wind, but as if someone had pushed it from the outside. A gust of cold air rushed in, making the fire flicker. Amara started, the small knife in her hand falling to the ground. In the yard, amidst the puddles of rain-smeared water, a figure appeared, not clear, just a hazy mist like a reflection in a watery mirror. But Amara recognized it instantly. There was no mistaking it. Those eyes, that gaze. The same as the first day they met by the old willow tree, deep, sorrowful, as if carrying the entire ocean in their depths. It was Sana. She said nothing. No call, no whisper, like the wind. Only a look, full of pleading, full of urgency. Then the figure slowly dissolved, blending into the rain, leaving the ground empty as if nothing had been there. For a moment, Amara couldn't breathe. She ran out to the yard, kneeling on the cold, wet earth, raising her hands as if to grasp at the lingering warmth. But all that remained was the sound of the rain. She returned to the house. Zaria was sitting up, her eyes open but unblinking, as if she had just seen something through her sleep. Without a word, Amara walked over and pulled her daughter into her arms. She felt that small heart beating fast, like a frightened fledgling. But there was something else too, a faint energy radiating from Zaria, unclear but warm to the point of overwhelming. Amara stroked her daughter's hair, closed her eyes, and knew. Sana hadn't come to frighten, nor to call in a debt. She came to warn, to deliver a message. And deep in a mother's intuition, Amara understood that Zaria stood at the threshold of a journey, a path no one could walk for her, a call growing stronger in her blood, a memory not her own, seeking its way back. She couldn't stop it, but she could prepare, she could listen, and she could pray that love, maternal love, would be strong enough to protect her child, no matter what world she faced. Would Amara be ready to let go when her daughter was called to a place where a mother's love could not reach?
That morning, the sky was grey, as if painted by the hand of a despairing artist. The air was shrouded in mist, with wet branches swaying gently in the light breeze. Amara walked slowly along the red dirt path leading to the edge of the village, where wild grass grew, and the wind often carried whispers as if from another world. Her heart was heavy. The previous night, the image of Sana dissolving into the rain had left a mark on her mind, and Zaria's trembling embrace only made it clearer. Time was running out. Old Nia's hut stood hidden among interwoven trees, draped in vines. No one came there unless they truly needed to. The villagers called her the keeper of memory's soul, a witness to things that existed before the current world defined what was real and what was superstition. Amara didn't knock. She stood there, her hand lightly touching the moss-covered bamboo frame as a silent gesture of permission. The door creaked open, without anyone touching it. The scent of agarwood incense and dry timber rushed in, carrying the feeling of ancient dreams. Inside, faint light flickered from a small burning oil lamp. Nia sat motionless like a stone statue, her silver hair cascading down her back. No questions were needed, no explanations required. The old woman merely tilted her head, her eyes like two dry wells fixed on Amara, a gaze belonging to someone who had lived long enough to understand everything before it even happened. Silently, Amara sat down. Words were unnecessary. The air seemed to thicken with things that could not be spoken aloud. Slowly, Nia reached for a small bundle of cloth tied with hemp rope and placed it in Amara's palm. Inside was a shimmering green gem, the same hue as the light that had once radiated from Sanaa's body. No confirmation was needed. Amara's heart clenched. She no longer had any doubts. Zaria carried the blood of Posema, not because of a ritual, not due to some strange coincidence, but as a result of compassion, of the fateful moment when Amara chose to save a dying soul instead of turning away like so many others. Every cell in her body trembled. She didn't know what to feel: pride, regret, or both at once. Questions surged like crashing waves. Was this Sanaa's gift, or a burden Zaria would carry for life? Naya finally spoke, her voice dry as burnt grass, yet heavy enough to make each word fall like stone. That child will not belong to this land forever. The water will call, and no one can stop it, but a mother can teach her child not to drift lost in the current. Amara closed her eyes. Her heart felt as if it were breaking into pieces. Since childhood, she had believed maternal love was an unbreakable bond, a place to hold, to cling, to embrace tightly. But now, she had to learn something new. To love also meant letting her child go, not out of loss, but to let her live as what she was born to become. As she left the hut, the sky still offered no sunlight, but within Amara's heart, a gentle light began to spread. It was unclear whether it was courage or a pain that had finally been named. Could it be that the most sacred love is the love that knows how to let go? That night, the wind blowing from the lake carried the briny scent of salt and a low murmur, as if rising from the earth's depths. The weather turned strangely, the trees rustling, and the water's surface no longer reflected the moonlight, but became a silver-grey mirror, silent and sombre. In the small house, Zarya was gripped by a high fever, her body burning like embers, her lips cracked and dry, her breaths ragged and uneven. Amara had done everything she could, applying herbs, cooling her down, massaging with medicinal liquor, but all efforts were in vain. With no other choice, she wrapped the girl in an old woolen shawl, cradling her limp, fragile body as she stepped out into the night, moving like someone in a dream. Amara's feet pressed into the cold mud, navigating the familiar paths of her childhood, heading toward the lake as if summoned by something wordless. She did not cry, did not call out, only walked silently through the dark, like the mothers in ancient tales seeking to reclaim their child's soul. When she reached the lake, she laid Zarya down on a moss-covered cloak. The moon rose to its zenith, full and round like the gaze of ancestors. The air was utterly still, and then the water parted. From the heart of the lake, a column of pale golden light shot upward, and from within it she emerged. Sana. No longer a frail creature bound by weakness, she was now more radiant than ever. Golden scales covered her body like the armor of a spiritual warrior, her hair flowing long like strands of seaweed smoothed by moonlight. Her eyes, unchanged from years past, were deep and sorrowful, but no longer broken, now carrying the steadiness of one who had crossed the boundary of life and death. Amara said nothing. She only knelt, placing her hand on Zarya's chest, as if offering her daughter to the heavens and earth. Sana's voice was soft as the breeze, yet clear as a bell from the depths of the water. The child is bleeding between two worlds, but it is not too late to heal. From the water, she drew out a small bundle wrapped in lotus leaves. Inside was spirit moss, a rare moss that grows only where river meets sea, and marsh sap distilled into a glistening paste. It was an ancient remedy, passed down only to Pasema mothers to nurture a child of two bloodlines. Amara asked no questions. She had grown accustomed to needing no explanations from this world. Sana gently placed the bundle in Amara's hands, her eyes gazing at Zarya, like a memory given a name. It was not merely pity. It was as if a part of her own soul was being continued. "But remember," she said, "every drop of a mother's love is a shield. Yet love cannot protect without the courage to let go." At those words, Amara's heart stung as if cut. She knew the mermaid's words were not a warning, but a milestone. One day, Zarya would have to leave, not because she was taken, but because she would return to where she belonged, and the mother would have to stand by the water's edge, not clinging, only praying her child would know the way back. As Sana dissolved into the light, the lake's surface grew still again, as if never disturbed. But in Amara's hands, the remedy warmed, as if pulsing with the beat of new life just bestowed. Dawn broke after a night that felt like a century. Mist still blanketed the rooftops, but in Amara's heart, a light pierced through the darkness. On the bamboo bed, Zarya slowly stirred. Her breathing was lighter, her forehead no longer burning, and her pale lips faintly murmured an indistinct sound. Amara sat beside her, sleepless through the night, her hand still clasping her daughter's as if letting go even once would mean forever. When Zarya opened her eyes to look at her mother, Something had changed in her gaze. Not the bewildered look of a child recovering from illness, but the ageless depth of a soul that had touched the boundary between two worlds. She didn't ask why she was lying there, nor did she recount what she had seen in her fevered dreams. She was simply silent. Amara gently stroked her daughter's hair and began to speak. She spoke of the fateful night a year ago, when she found a beautiful creature bound beneath the old willow tree. She told of the mermaid's pleading eyes, of the blood seeping from her own hands as she untangled the thorny ropes from her body. She recounted the nameless courage that drove a poor woman to risk everything, carrying a mythical being to safety through mud and the pursuit of hunters. Zarya listened without blinking. In the small room, there was only the sound of the wind slipping through the thatched roof and the faint beating of hearts. At last, the girl asked, her voice as soft as a breath, "If one day I have to leave you, will it hurt you?" The question, simple and tender like a knife's edge, made Amara pause. The pain, long hidden behind days of false calm, surged forth like an old wound touched anew. But she didn't turn away, nor did she lie. "Yes." Her voice choked, her eyes red. "But if you go to become who you truly are, I'll be happier than if I kept you here, just because I'm afraid of being alone." That answer wasn't just for Zarya. It was a lesson from generations of women, those who bore children not to keep them close, but to give the world a soul that was strong, kind, and free. In the pale morning light, Amara continued, sharing the teachings of her own mother from years past, when she let Amara leave the village to follow a sailor to live in a strange place among the marshes. "True love," her mother had said, "doesn't demand anyone stay. It teaches them to be strong enough to walk away." Zarya nodded. No more tears. No more fear. Only a strange stillness, like the surface of a windless lake. In that moment, Amara realized her daughter was growing up, not in years, but in the courage to understand and accept her fate. But how much longer could a love so great keep them together before the water called a soul back to its home? That morning, the mist still clung to the lake's surface like a thin veil hiding the secrets of heaven and earth. Zarya stood there by the water's edge, holding the radiant golden scale, the last remnant of Sanaa's memory. It glimmered faintly like a breath, but to Zarya it was as heavy as an unanswered question. Who am I in these two worlds? The cool morning breeze wove through her hair, carrying whispers that only those who had touched the soul of the water could hear. Zarya's bare feet sank into the soft mud, feeling the gentle pulse of the earth. She gazed down at the still lake and whispered, to no one in particular, "I'm not ready to leave, but I'm ready to understand who I am." And with a motion as light as letting go, Zarya placed the scale into the shallow well by the lake's edge. Not a sound arose, only the water's surface rippling faintly, like a sigh from the depths. As if the lake itself knew, a soul had chosen to stay, not to flee, but to find itself. From that day, Zarya was no longer just the girl of the marshes. She lived with two worlds in her heart, one of dust, hearth smoke, children's laughter, and the muddy paths leading back to the old bamboo house. The other of deep green waters, moonlit nights, and songs heard only in silence. Zarya grew up, carrying the wisdom of the Earth Mother and the memories of the deep sea. When she touched water, she heard the whispers of the Posema ancestors. When she walked into the village, she saw the trusting eyes of the poor children learning under the school roof her mother had built with a lifetime of sacrifice. Amara, the woman with calloused hands and a tireless heart, stayed on. She taught the children letters, kindness, and a love that didn't demand possession. Those children, most without mothers, found in her a warmth that didn't require blood ties. For Amara understood, some children are not born from the womb, but from courage. And maternal love doesn't always lie in biology, but in the choice to love and protect. On rainy afternoons, she still stood by the lake, holding her husband's old shawl, stitching a few more threads to keep it from fraying. The wind rose, carrying the scent of sea salt. But instead of fear, Amara smiled, for she knew her daughter was not torn between two worlds. She was their bridge. As a mother, she had learned the greatest lesson. To love is not to hold tight, but to plant roots deep enough so that when a child flies away, they always know the way back. And when Zaria sat teaching the children to sing ancient Posema chants by the stream, she knew nothing had been in vain. Tomorrow, Zaria might be called back to the heart of the water. The wind might shift again. But a legacy had been sown, not just through magic, but through every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every lullaby sung by the poorest mother in the village. Has Zaria's journey truly ended, or is it only just beginning, amid the distant call and the quiet pulse of an immortal maternal love? Perhaps the most sacred thing a mother can do is not to keep her child by her side, but to give them a world where they can be their true self. Through the two parts of this story, from the marshes to the depths of the lake, from smouldering wounds to the light of healing, we have witnessed a maternal love unbound by blood, steeped in faith, sacrifice, and the courageous act of letting go. Amara is no goddess, yet she became a bridge between the human world and the spirit of the water, with nothing but her calloused hands and a heart that never stopped loving. And Zaria, the girl thought to be merely the daughter of a poor widow, has become part of a living legend, a testament to the truth that origins do not limit what one can become. But will Zaria truly choose to stay forever? Or on some full moon night, will the heart of the water call her name once more? Has Sanaa's soul truly found peace? And behind that veil of water, what stories remain untold? If you, like me, feel that something remains unresolved, then perhaps the third part of this journey is waiting to be written. Please leave a comment to let me know. Where are you watching from, and what moved you most in Amara and Zaria's journey? Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part, where the secrets beneath the water may run deeper than we imagine. And who knows, you might find yourself somewhere in that journey, between love and the courage to let go.